Okay, it's now streaming live.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone and those members of the public and press who may be watching the live stream of this meeting on the Council's website, and those joining us today. Members, you're aware by now of the need to keep your video camera switched on, please, if you can, for the duration of the meeting, and to keep your microphone muted except when you're invited to speak. And as ever, please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or make a comment. Obviously, there's always the risk we might run into technical difficulties, and I'd ask for your patience if we do. And obviously, there may be the need to declare an adjournment if that happens while we address the fault. And if it's not possible to address the fault, in extreme circumstances, we may have to abandon the meeting. But fortunately, that hasn't happened to date, so hopefully nothing undue will happen. Can I just remind everybody here that all virtual meetings are being recorded? I will move now on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence and declarations of interest and announcements. So I'm going to begin just by calling the names of all members of the committee to establish your presence. So please unmute your microphones now. We have received apologies from Councillor Goldsack. Councillor Hay is very kindly substituting, thank you. And Councillor Wells and Councillor French is substituting. So thank you to the subs. So if you can let me know you're present. Councillor David Ambrose-Smith.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Adela Costello.
Present.
Councillor Jan French.
Present.
Councillor Derek Giles. I think has not yet joined us. Okay. Councillor Anne Hay.
Present.
Councillor Nicola Harrison.
Present.
Councillor Mark Howell.
Present.
Councillor Graham Wilson.
Present.
And myself, Councillor Anna Bailey. Thank you very much, everyone. Now, just a little bit of business that I'd like us to attend to if possible. Councillor Sandra Crawford, who was the Labour representative on the Adults Committee, resigned from the Labour group on Tuesday. And unfortunately, it's not possible to substitute for someone who's no longer a member of a committee. The Constitution states that the Democratic Services Manager needs to be informed of any changes in committee membership no later than 12 noon, 5 clear working days before the meeting. So that hasn't been possible. Given that Council has obviously approved a place to the Labour group on the Adults Committee, I'd like to propose that this standing order, which for technical information is section 23, appointments to committees, which is part 4.4, committee and subcommittee meetings, part 4, rules of procedure, that we suspend that rule of procedure to enable Councillor Linda Jones to represent the Labour group at this meeting. Could I ask for, if I have a seconder for that proposal? I've got Councillor Smith. Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. So I would like us to take a vote on that. Councillor Wilson, you've got your, do you want to raise your blue hand? Are you asking a question or what? Councillor Wilson.
I just wanted to clarify if Councillor Crawford has resigned from the Labour group, presumably she's become an independent. So how do the rules of proportionality work now on this committee, and have we checked that it is still appropriate for Labour to have a seat here?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I've received advice that the proportionality paper will be coming forward to full council. So my understanding from Democratic Services is that what I am suggesting we do today is appropriate and constitutional.
Thank you.
So I think we should take a formal vote on this. So if I can, I will read out your name, and if you can tell me whether you're for or against or abstaining. And just to be clear, my proposal is that we're suspending standing order in order to enable Councillor Linda Jones to represent the Labour group at this meeting. So for or against or abstentions, Councillor David Ambrose-Smith.
For.
Councillor Costello.
For.
Councillor French.
For.
Councillor Giles has not yet joined us, I don't think. Councillor Hay.
For.
Councillor Harrison.
For.
Howell. Councillor Mark Howell.
I do apologise for.
Councillor Wilson.
For.
And myself, I am for. So that was unanimously carried. So I think we can now let Councillor Jones into the meeting. So we'll just wait to allow that to happen. Councillor Jones, welcome. Can you? Yes, here you are. Welcome to the meeting, Councillor Jones. We've just taken a successful unanimous vote to support the suspension of the standing order so that you could join us today and represent the Labour group at our Adults Committee. So a warm welcome. And we should just thank Councillor for her very long service on the Adults Committee. She's been on it for many years and we thank her for her involvement in the committee. Right, so we're just moving on to declarations of interest, Councillor Jones. So does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest for items on the agenda today? If so, please raise your blue hand. No, I'm not seeing anybody. So we can move on to item 2, which is the minutes of the meeting on the 8th of October. So we're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 8th of October as a correct record. So can I ask any member who doesn't agree with the proposal to click the raised hand function on the right of your screen now? I'm not seeing any objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as a correct record, so we will take that as carried. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 3, which is the action log. It's there in the agenda. Does anybody have any questions on the action log? Are there any Councillor Wilson?
Well, I just wanted to ask whether we had any update on the item from the July 2020 meeting about the housing related support services, where some information from Mark 4 was going to be available in August. I don't know whether that's related to the new strategy and effectively overturned. And then I've got one other issue I'd like to raise.
What, on the action log? Do you want to do it now?
Well, related to the actions from last meeting.
Which item is it on the action log?
It's not on the action log.
But this item's to talk about the action log.
It's to do with actions from the last meeting. So how do you deal with an item if there are activities relating to the last meeting? Particularly, I'm particularly thinking about the creation of the member reference group to do with the care suites, where I've been in correspondence with Fiona Macmillan.
This item that we're on at the moment is to deal with the action log, Councillor Wilson, you know, I understand that you've raised an issue directly with the monitoring officer, and I do believe you've received a detailed response, and I too have had advice from the monitoring officer who has confirmed that you know the decision was taken constitutionally. So, you know, there is no provision on this agenda for further discussion of that, and I do believe you've you know, had due discussions behind the scenes with the monitoring officer, and the way that the decision was taken at the last meeting was constitutional. So I'm going to ask.
Well, I agree with that, but I agree with that.
Councillor Wilson, I'm now going to ask. I'm now Councillor Wilson, can you please not interrupt me? We're on the action log at the moment, so I'm now going to just ask officers to give a response to your question, which was about item 294 of the action log, which does mark the ARC4 report as an ongoing and circulation of the ARC4 report is ongoing. Can I just have an update from an officer on that, please? Who wants to take that? Is that Wendy? Has it formally been circulated?
I think that would be from Oliver. If we don't, can I take it offline if Oliver or Will can't update, if that's okay? And I'll make sure that that is done if it hasn't been.
Have you got anything to add?
So yeah, so I'll just, no, I haven't got anything to add. We'll make sure it's circulated after the meeting.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, so we will make sure that the ARC4 report is circulated. Thank you for pointing that out. The rest of the actions are completed or closed, or the first one, which is on hold, which we know about. We discussed that last time. Any other queries on the action log? Councillor Wilson, you've got your hand up. Is that from last time, or is that a new query on the action log?
No, I need to lower it as you won't
Right,
have
lovely.
any discussion about the Care Suites reference group.
Famous. Well, no, as I've already explained, Councillor Wilson, the action log is to talk about items on the action log. And I do believe you've had a very detailed response on the making of the appointing of members to the Care Suites reference group.
Yeah, but I agree. But the other
Councillor
members
Wilson,
of the committee,
please.
the other members of the committee have not had the opportunity to.
Councillor Wilson, if you want to contact other members of the committee, you are free to do so behind the scenes. It is not an item on our agenda today, and you are perfectly at liberty to contact other members of the committee on email or by telephone or however you wish to do that. But it is not on the action log, and I'm moving on to the next item on the agenda. Which item 4 is petitions and public questions. We have one request to speak, which relates to item 7 on the agenda, which is the housing related support strategy. I propose that we take that when we reach item 7 on the agenda, which I think will be the most helpful point to take it. No petitions have been received, so we will move on to key decisions. And item 5 is the Infection Control Fund. And I think Shauna is with us to introduce the report, please, Shauna.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm here today to ask for approval for the recommended allocation of the discretionary element of the latest infection control grant issued by central government. In September 2020, Adults Committee were updated on the allocation and distribution of the first tranche of the Infection Control Fund, and since then, central government have announced a further round of funding, which equates to just under 5.5 million in Cambridgeshire. The purpose of the fund is to support all adult social care providers to mitigate the risks of COVID transition and manage wider workforce resilience, which comes at a significant cost to the market. As detailed in section 1.2, the government have provided really clear guidance on the allocation of the grants, with the council being given discretion over 20% of this. It is recommended that the 20% discretionary element is split equally between CQC registered community providers and commissioned day services providers, which are in operation, and housing related support providers. The rationale for this is that the rationale for this acknowledges the complexity of need and the complexity of circumstances these providers are having to manage at the moment on an ongoing basis, and the costs associated with this in light of the pandemic. The recommendation was also formulated in part in consultation with a wide range of stakeholders, as detailed within the report. Providers are required to confirm commitment to adhering to grant conditions around spend of that money, as well as state aid regulations before allocations and funding are transferred. Subject to the approval of Adults Committee, we intend to distribute the funding in one lump sum in January 2021. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Shauna, and thank you to officers for the very collaborative manner that you've worked with providers to decide on the use of this 20% element of the discretionary element of the fund. It's very much appreciated. Your hard work with providers, I think, has got us to a good point. So, members, would anybody wishing to ask a question or make a comment, please indicate now with your blue hand. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. In paragraph 2.2, it explains how the 20% is going to be distributed, and it's to providers that support service users. So I think the committee needs to be absolutely clear that self-funders are not going to benefit at all from this money that's come from government. I appreciate that that's hard for them to do. Well, perhaps you could explain then how it works, because my understanding is that per service user means per service user funded by the county. Is that not correct?
Let's get some clarification from Shauna.
Absolutely. So 80% of the grant will be to all service users, Graham, and sorry for the, Councillor Wilson, sorry for the misunderstanding around that. So the 80% will go to providers who are delivering both to council commission services and external and self-funder services across those service areas. So it's all CQC registered providers, whether we commission them or not, to deliver support. From the 20%, the CQC registered community providers will be all community providers, and it essentially tops up what they will receive through the 80%, acknowledging the level of cost they're having to manage at the moment. And the impact that is having. From a housing related support and day service providers, this will focus on what we do commission at the moment rather than the wider market.
So sorry, Shauna, just to be absolutely clear then, so in the first bullet, the money going to CQC registered community providers is to all users, whether or not they are funded by the county or are self-funders. But the commission day services and housing related support is to those that are funded by the county. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, and from housing related support, because a lot of those support services are wrapped around people who are at risk of becoming homelessness or are homeless. Actually, it's a different kind of split. The nature of that service is very different to, say, home care, which is delivered to everyone. So self-funders won't play as big a part in that, if that makes sense. From a day service provider point of view, it will have it's now enabling that provider to continue to deliver services, and a lot of those providers have a mix of self-funders and funded clients within there. We don't necessarily collect the information about self-funders for day services because they will operate a private arrangement, but what this will do is help them to mitigate the costs of doing that for the wider group, if that makes sense.
I think it'd be helpful if the minutes could clarify precisely what this money is going to benefit, who this money is going to benefit. Thank you.
Make sure that's covered in the minutes, Councillor Wilson. In a nutshell, it's going to providers who cater for all types of clients, whether they're funded by the local authority or privately funding the care. The only exception to that, as I've understood it, is the housing related support element, but generally that is not a service that is accessed by people who are privately funding their care in any case. So I think it's comprehensive. It's covering everybody to help them meet their infection control requirements, I think.
Well,
but we will make sure that
was certainly the intention, but if you read the first sentence, it does specifically say ... services commissioned by the council for adults on a per person basis, which I read on people that we pay for, not people who
so we will make it absolutely clear, because those providers are also providing to people who are privately funding their care, and therefore those people will benefit, is essentially what we're saying. But we'll make sure it's clear in the minutes. Anybody else wanting to comment on this item or ask any questions, clarification? No. So committee, we are actually being asked to agree the recommended allocation of the discretionary element of the infection control fund. And as we've just heard, that will see 20% of the fund distributed to CQC registered community providers, providers of commissioned day services who remain open, and operational and commissioned housing related support provision. So we will now move to the vote. I didn't really hear anybody speaking in objection to that recommendation. If you do object to it, therefore, can you please raise your blue hand now? So I can't see any objections, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move on to item 6, which is our large item, the Adults Committee review of the draft revenue capital business planning proposals for the next financial year 21 and the medium-term financial strategy taking us to 2026. Just a reminder, members, that there's an exempt appendix in your pack, Appendix 1B. That's the People, Communities, Finance tables. It's confidential. It's exempt as it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of a particular person. including the authority holding that information. So if any member does wish to discuss the content of that particular appendix, we would need to go into a private session. Can members let me know now by using the blue hand function if you think you do need to discuss the exempt appendix, just so we can deal with the meeting well? No, okay. If at any point you feel yourself slipping into that, just we will need to go into exempt session. So Charlotte Black and Will Patton, I think you're here to introduce the report, and I think Stephen Howarth is on hand to help present or answer any questions, particularly around probably finance, if there are any arising. So over to Charlotte and Will. Yeah,
thank you. Just before we hand over to Stephen to go through the detail of the report, I just thought it would be helpful to describe the context that we've been working in and our areas of focus in terms of planning for next year. And there's sort of 4 key areas really that have informed the work that we've been doing. The first is understanding and working through the changes in demand that we've seen for our services as a result of COVID. And as we've, since March, we've been learning about some of that impact. We've certainly got a better understanding of the services and how they're being impacted. And as part of the business planning process, we've been refining those assumptions as we've been working through some of the financial numbers. The second area is around us effectively circling back on the undelivered savings this year and identifying which of those we can deliver next year. And in addition to that, identifying new opportunities. So things like continued emphasis on our adults positive challenge work. And then the third area is around market shaping. So obviously the market has been impacted by the pandemic, and within the business plan, there's you'll see that we continue to support the market and shape the market, be that through block contracts and increases. And then lastly is accelerating the Think Communities approach, which we've talked about before. And specifically, this is about how we commission at a place-based level, develop new models of care, such as care suites. And again, you'll see that theme come through the business plan. So 4 key areas, and you'll see those themes play through, hopefully, the numbers that Stephen's going to take us through. Charlotte, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think as Will said, really, I think this year, in the next financial year, the main focus will be on continuing to deliver the plans that we had for this financial year. And recognising, and I think this was covered at the last committee in quite a lot of detail, that adults positive challenge, 2 big areas in terms of adults. One is the work around the contributions policy, which the committee discussed at length previously, and also the adults positive challenge programme, where we've gone for as realistic a sense of what can be achieved in terms of cost avoidance and demand management in the next financial year as possible. So those are the 2 main items, and Stephen, I think, will probably want to add to that.
Thank you. Yes, I'll not go into a huge amount more detail, as we could be here all afternoon going through line by line, but just to say, this is obviously the second draft of the business planning proposals that the committee has seen following the September meeting. In September, the budget gap across the whole council was £33 million. Following the review of estimates that Will referenced over the last sort of 6 weeks since that committee, review of estimates around funding, cost pressures, further savings, and several more months worth of COVID experience and work out the impact of it. The revised budget gap across the whole council is £21 million in this committee round. And it continues to be one of the most uncertain business planning cycles because of the impact of the pandemic on council spend and on council projections. The other thing to note is that this draft of the budget was prepared before the spending review that happened at the end of November. There remains a lot of detail outstanding on the impact of that spending review, and we're expecting more clarity on that in the provisional local government finance settlement, which should be in the next week or two. And at that point, budget estimates from the spending review and the finance settlement will be revised. That's generally more around funding, but specifically for Adults Committee, we expect that and the announcement in the spending review on a lower than expected increase in the minimum wage to have a more material impact on budget estimates for Adults Committee, as it should reduce the provider inflation budget line. The covering report sets out a lot of the corporate context and some benchmarking information, and section 8 of the report details the main changes in adult services between the September committee and the current committee today. They are set out in the report, and I'm happy to answer questions on them, but I won't go through them in great detail. The detailed finance tables is in the appendix, obviously go into even more detail on that, showing in table 1 the budget for Adults Committee across all 5 years of the cycle. Table 2 shows the detailed revenue budget build for 21-22, and table 3 shows the detailed changes for each year of the cycle. So in total, the current estimates show adult services requiring around an extra £20 million of additional budget next year, which is an increase of approximately 14%. It assumes new savings of around £2 million will be delivered, but also that undelivered savings from this year totaling around £3.7 million will be delivered as well. I'll just say, I think finally, before I'm happy to answer any questions, the COVID estimates specifically have been refreshed and revised. There's a specific line in the table called COVID impact on demand. And that number, which was in the September committee, is still seen as the best estimate for adults services following a review of that. So that is a summary from me, Chair. Thank you.
It's really helpful. Thank you, all three of you. And hopefully much of the content of this and the proposals is very familiar to the committee now, notwithstanding Councillor Jones has just joined, but you know, it should be familiar territory really. So members of the committee, would you like to make any comment or observations or ask any questions on the report? We have discussed much of this in the past. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, sorry, and it may just be my naivety, which
don't you apologise.
This question. So, if it is, forgive me. You talked in paragraph 7.5 about the additional demand, and part of the additional demand was about people who were self-funding, who might now need to shift to get financial assistance, and I could see that because of the impact of COVID. Further down in paragraph 8b, you talk about your expectation that income will increase. Now, it may be that I've muddled this up and that the older people's services, which people are paying more for, which is what I understand by the income increasing, doesn't relate to paragraph 7.5. But I was just sort of confused because it seems to me if people are likely to shift from self-funding to needing local authority support, then does that not create more pressure on income? And is income likely to rise or is income likely to go down? So perhaps just take me through that, if you would.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Charlotte,
Stephen looks poised.
Okay.
Only slightly. So I suppose, Councillor Jones, the answer is both are the case, but just sort of within the same number, I think. So the COVID impact on demand line in the demand section does account for the expected effect of some more self-funders requiring council support, particularly in bed-based care. The baseline demand line has been recalculated to make sure that we are sort of capturing the full additional cost of income where there are a rise in bed numbers over time. So part of the demand pressure is rising bed numbers, and we are just making sure that we are factoring in the increased income that we do see on average per bed, per person in a bed. So we've got built-in pressure from more people, more self-funders requiring care, but also where there is a trend over time into more bed-based care, we are capturing the full impact of additional income from that.
It's about it not necessarily being the same people, really.
Yeah,
Does that help, Councillor Jones? You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I think what you're saying is that the numbers of extra people who are going to be paying in is outweighing the number of those people who might have been paying and are no longer paying. Is that what you're saying, really?
Yes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's all assumption based, but best estimates and doing the best model. And actually, I don't know how we'll do this year given COVID, but in past years, it's been remarkably accurate budget setting, actually, in terms of numbers, incredibly accurate. It always astonishes me with such a huge budget and large numbers of people, how accurate we've managed to get it in the past sometimes, or officers have. I can't take any credit for it whatsoever. Right, Councillor Wilson, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, thank you for this extremely comprehensive report. And there's a lot of really good explanation in it. I've got two questions. One, something I don't understand, and then a more, I guess, more politically nuanced question. At the bottom of page 16, it says, to date, the council has not taken all of the upside created from the change to the minimum revenue provision policy into revenue, and unlike most other councils, has set this aside in order to provide pump priming funding for the transformation programme. So what does that mean in practice, Stephen? Does that mean that we've got more flexibility to do with some money than we are currently using?
So broadly, that is an explanation of how the transformation fund was established about 5 years ago. So the council changed its minimum revenue provision policy, which is a technical accounting in local government for asset depreciation, which produced some upside, which was put into the transformation fund. That has each year there is a sort of a recurrent but diminishing effect of that change that currently goes into the transformation fund each year.
Okay, and then the other.
Essentially, Graham, I think what it means is that, at the moment we're choosing to take that upside as part of the transformation fund, but it does give options on, that there is revenue funding there available, and there are options on how to spend that revenue funding,
But that was what I was thinking, but I wanted to be sure before I made comments like that. And then I accept that we haven't included all the things that come from the spending review. There is reference to the a living wage not going up quite as high as we'd anticipated. But what the paper doesn't at the moment include is reference that the Chancellor in his spending review said adult social care precept could go up to 3%. So is there a view yet from you, Anna, or the officers as to whether or not that's something which you will be putting forward to GPC?
So, I mean, obviously, this is a matter for members' consideration, and I don't think we haven't yet. There's still a huge amount of uncertainty in the budget and where we stand, because although we've had the headline national announcements, we haven't had the detail yet at a local level on what that really means for Cambridgeshire. And if I just take you back to page 15, which is paragraph 2.2.1, and this old thorny issue about fairer funding, you'll see the stark difference there. Okay, that figure goes back to 1819, but you can see that Cambridgeshire County Council per head is getting £6.01 in that financial year, compared with the Shire County average and the London Borough average. And it's stark, and we've been long waiting for the fairer funding review in order to get a better deal for what is a massive growth county. So I think that one of the concerns that I think I have about the spending review is that the adult social care money that's coming, I fear that it may be distributed via the funding formula that we had for the last round of funding, which was not as favourable for Cambridgeshire County Council as previous rounds had been. And I think a large driver of that, I think I'm right in saying, Stephen, was around deprivation. rather than necessarily like growth and other factors, which means that if they use the same formula, you know, we may not do as well. So I think there's still a huge amount of uncertainty as to how much money we're going to get and how we're going to plug that 21 odd million pound gap that we've got. We know it's smaller than that, but we don't know how much smaller yet. And there are going to be choices to be made, Graham. And, you know, it's up to the administration to put forward its ideas on and priorities, just as it is for the opposition parties to put forward their ideas and priorities. And obviously, just for clarity, the budget model is built and the assumptions are based on a 2% increase in council tax. We were calling it adult social care precept. And it is now open to all members to consider up to a 4.99% increase in council tax. I personally speaking, you know, I'm incredibly mindful that we are already a high tax authority, and you know, many of our residents are really suffering. And obviously, when the county council puts up council tax, it has the biggest impact on the actual council tax bill that people pay. So, you know, it's going to need very careful consideration this year, more than ever, I think, before, about the priorities that, you know, and the difficult decisions that we need to take. So nothing about February's budget is going to be easy, that's for sure. Have I got any other members wanting to comment on any of the business proposals or business planning proposals? Councillor Harrison, you're
yes,
waving?
I'm so sorry. I had my screen minimised in order to be looking at the papers, and then I find it very difficult to find that blue hand.
Okay,
well, actually, sorry, it's only just a question then that perhaps something could be emailed to us, because I was just interested to hear you say just a moment ago that we're a high tax authority. To tell the truth, I always thought that we were a relatively low tax authority, and it would be very helpful to me if we could have an email just you know, from finance, just explaining to us how we do compare.
We could ask Stephen to ask for that to be done. I mean, I base my comments on, you know, please don't quote me on these figures, but you know, if you think we're somewhere in the £1,700 mark, I think for Band D, compared that with say like Westminster, which last time I looked was around £600 or something like that. You know, the Shire counties tend to be higher council tax bills than you know, the unitaries and the London boroughs and the like. You know, and probably driven to a large extent by this funding formula that we've all been coping with for so very, very long. You know, it's a massively historical problem that we've had. And that's massively compounded in Cambridgeshire because we're a big growth authority and the funding formula just does not recognise that at all in many ways. Okay, Councillor Howell, you've got your hand up.
I was going to mention the funding formula and the fact that every Conservative thinks it's a high taxing authority and every Labour and Lib Dem thinks it's a low taxing authority. That's all I was going to say.
If I could just say that I wasn't making any assumptions, I was asking a question. So can we just avoid that sort of thing? Because honestly, I was not inferring anything.
Okay, no, that's absolutely, we will just ask for some factual information and we'll probably all be wrong. So we'll probably come out somewhere in the middle. It's absolutely fine, Councillor Harrison. We'll get some actual facts on that. I think it'd be really helpful because I must admit that my memory is going back a few years on it. So it'd be good to see where we are now. Okay, I'm not. Oh, Councillor Wilson, you've got your hand up again.
Well, I'm sorry, but if nobody else is going to ask some more questions, I'll just ask one specific one. I'm slightly concerned about feeding in a further additional vacancy factor.
What page are you on here, Councillor Wilson?
Sorry, say that again.
What page number are you on? Sorry.
Oh, I don't know, Stephen. You'll need to help me out. I know it's 100.
I know exactly what you're talking about,
it's
but
page 44, I think.
It's £150,000, and the assumption is that because it takes a while to recruit new people, then we can build in the savings that we make in not having people in post and not paying their salaries or their pensions. But we have to be careful that we don't try and double count that, because we already make those savings anyway, And that's just something which at the end of the financial year helps us to avoid too big a overspend. That once you start adding in specific additional vacancy factors, I think there is always pressure on managers to say, whatever you do, don't be too quick in getting somebody in place. And if Stephen says, well, I'm leaving in 3 months' time, wait a couple of months before you start trying to recruit him. And I wouldn't want that at all. I would want to make sure that wherever possible, there was some sort of handover, not that there was a vacancy factor. So I just throw that in as a specific example of a saving where I think sometimes we've got to be really careful that we're not throwing stuff in just to make the numbers balance properly.
Would you like me to answer that?
We're actually on page 67. If anybody wants to actually get to the business case, it's page 67. Charlotte, yes, please.
Yeah. So completely understand those concerns, Councillor Wilson. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's been lots of discussion between myself and finance about this. The proposed, I mean, really, this is a very pragmatic recognition that in some of, we've got a large number of staff, and this isn't a target. So we're not aiming to achieve this. This is a sort of pragmatic recognition that given the number of staff that we have, we are likely to it's possible that we will underspend. And if we do, that additional 150 will go towards the vacancy savings target. However, what we're very clear about is that the manager's concern, the instruction they've been given is to recruit 2 vacancies as quickly as possible and not to delay in any way to achieve that 150,000. So we're very, very clear, and I think Stephen and I completely understand that it's possible that won't be achieved, but it's just a pragmatic recognition that because of staff turnover and the time that it takes in some of our, our time to recruit has been massively reduced, so we're in a much better place than we were. But in reality, that's probably a realistic end of year position, but it's not something we're aiming to achieve, if you understand what I mean.
It is a very small percentage of the staffing budget, isn't it? I think that's the point. Yeah. And looking back historically, is highly likely to happen, probably. I think that's exactly what you're really saying. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'd be bold to ask another question. I wanted to ask about the next business case, which is the micro-enterprise support proposal. And I can see it's well worked through, and it's a very interesting proposal. And I've read the community catalysts model and read the reports of it in action in other cities. I think what I was concerned about, and what has, I think, come out a little bit in other cities, has been the issue about quality and about monitoring. Because obviously, if you've got a community catalyst who's trying to monitor and sort of, as it were, keep an eye on a lot of sole supporters, sole carers, which is the model, the personal assistant model, then that's an extremely difficult thing to do. And I'm interested that Healthwatch is going to take part in the evaluation. But I think this is comment rather than a question, I think it'll be really important to ensure that the monitoring aspect and therefore the quality aspect of it is secure if you're going to go from this model, this pilot as it were, to roll it out much more. Because, in other circumstances, we have seen this issue where sole carers, sole supporters find it very difficult over time to kind of keep up standards. And actually, it's very difficult to monitor them.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jones. We had this as an individual paper to our last committee, so you might want to, but no, that's absolutely fine. It's
My apologies,
really No, you weren't to know at all, and it's really helpful to have your comments on it. I think it's an exciting project. The idea is that it's built into a wider project that is around our whole shift to place-based working and place-based commissioning and place-based activity, where you would hope that the network around this stuff is strong enough to pick up issues and pick up problems. And I hope that's the way that this is the turn that this is going to take, because it's a really valid point that you make. The smaller an organisation, the less resilience and infrastructure it's got around those kind of issues around safeguarding and that sort of thing. So I think it's a really valid point, and it will be interesting to see how we do make sure that that's being monitored, etc. Did officers want to make any comment on that, or offer any words of reassurance or anything?
I think I would just add, Chair, that obviously one of the things that we strive for in adult social care is what we call personalisation. So actually for us, if we could have more people who had a direct payment and were shaping their own care in a way that actually reflects their needs and what's available in their local community, that would be a really good thing. And we do have a direct payments provider. Part of their role is to actually support those PAs and make sure that all the kind of right quality checks are in place. So we don't just sort of stand back and let it happen. And we obviously monitor and review people's care once a year as well to make sure that any issues have been picked up. But often we see some really good practice from individual PAs, and I think it'd be great if we could have more of them. Shauna may want to add.
Quite low, still a little bit low in Cambridgeshire, aren't we, compared with some of our statistical neighbours, and generally people, it's much more flexible support, and generally people are getting better outcomes, aren't they? And thankfully instances of massive issues or safeguarding problems are very rare, aren't they? So I
think they are. I think Shauna may want to add something as well, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, you make a really valid point, and something that we discussed in detail when going into that, when engaging in the process to develop the business case. And I think what is really unique about the Community Catalyst model is they work with local community to set up networks, as Chair referred to earlier, so that when there is an issue or a struggle or a crisis, actually there's a network of independent PAs, services that can pick up and support each other through that, so that you don't get that quality, that dip in quality or that risk occurring. And that's the kind of basis from which they operate. So that, combined with the feedback Charlotte just gave, I think will provide us with a level of assurance around that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Members, I can't see any other blue hands waving at me. I mean, we are very familiar with a lot of this content, so and we have discussed quite a bit of it in detail in the past. So, Councillor Wilson, if you have concerns about the 150k staffing lag budget, perhaps it's something that your group could consider. As one of your amendments in your, when you presumably you'll put forward an alternative budget proposals or whatever, but that's something for your consideration.
Yeah, whatever. If we could cover the recommendations, because
just coming on to those, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah. Excellent. Because let's think about how we deal with C then. Because I'm happy.
Well, I was just moving on to the recommendation. So do you have something to comment on the capital programme?
No, I wish to support. I'll just give you a bit of clarification. I'm keen to support A, B, and note D, but I would abstain on C. If you wish to take them separately, if you wish to take them all together, then I would abstain on all.
I haven't heard what your issues are on the capital programme. Do you have some concerns you'd like to share with us?
No, sorry. The C says comment on the capital programme and endorse. Oh, wait a minute. I'm looking at the wrong one. B then. I beg your pardon, Dana. B is a comment on the draft budget and savings proposal. So that is the one where there's the 150,000, and there may be other issues that we wish to deal with separately. So both for B and in order to keep options open on C that I wasn't proposing to cover because the capital programme for adults is very small. I would abstain on both of those.
Right, okay. I mean, I'm not minded to take them separately. The recommendations are there, and you have your mechanisms to, bring forward your alternative proposals. So, I think it just, in the interests of time and efficacy, I think we need to take the recommendations as set out. But obviously, you've got an option to do what you do, to vote the way you feel you need to. So the recommendations are there. Just for clarity, we're being asked to note the overview and context provided for the 2021 to 22 and 25-26 business plan, comment on the draft budget and savings proposals in the remit of the committee and endorse them to the GPC committee as part of consideration of the overall business plan. Same with the capital programme, and to note the fees and charges 2021-22. So given the indication that there isn't wholesome support, we will take each committee member in turn. So please unmute your microphones now and be ready to respond. So please tell me whether you are for or against or would like to abstain on recommendations A to D. Councillor David Ambrose Smith.
For.
Councillor Adela Costello.
For.
Councillor Jan French.
For.
Councillor Derek Giles is not with us. Councillor Anne Hay.
For.
Councillor Nicola Harrison.
Same.
Councillor Mark Howell.
For.
Councillor Linda Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Graham Wilson.
Abstain.
And myself, Councillor Anna Bailey. I am for. So Tamar, can you just give us the outcome of that vote?
Okay, so that is that's 6 for and 3 abstentions.
So it's a majority vote in favour. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, committee. It was a good discussion. So moving on to item 7, which is the housing related support strategy. Lisa Sparks is here to introduce the report, and then after we've had the introduction of the report, we'll hear from our public speaker, who's Mr. Chris Jenkin, who is the chair of It Takes a City, Cambridge. So Lisa, if you'd like to introduce the report for us, please. Is Lisa struggling to unmute herself? Lisa, are you? I can't see Lisa. Oh, there's Lisa. Lisa, how are you doing with unmuting? We can't hear you currently.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Can you hear me now? Okay, apologies for that. Sorry, it wouldn't come off.
That's okay.
So thank you, Councillor Bailey. Yep, we're bringing the paper along to you today because we're seeking member approval to actually adopt the new housing related support strategy. The paper also does contain some information around the HRS savings and where we are, but we're just asking that members note that the draft budget tables, which they're being asked to endorse, do include also a removal of the remaining HRS saving. So my intention is to focus on the strategy. Some of you may be aware that we completed a housing related support review in 2018, and one of the key recommendations from that was the development of the new housing related support strategy. A draft strategy was completed in early June. It's been through an extensive consultation process with a wide range of providers, partners and stakeholders. The consultation feedback we've received has been incorporated into the final draft of the strategy, and that's included for members at Appendix A, along with a summary of the consultation feedback, which can be found in Appendix B. So the draft strategy sets out our vision for housing related support services and focuses on our commissioning priorities for 2020-22, as well as outlining the commissioning approach and principles that will underpin our delivery. Essentially, the commissioning priorities for that period are going to be focused on ensuring that services commissioned to support homeless adults, rough sleepers, offenders and young people are able to evolve to enable them to continue to effectively meet the needs of current and future customers, as well as looking at how we change services to meet some of the gaps that were identified. So essentially the intention is to actually move away from our current model of support, which is predominantly hostel focused, towards a much more flexible commissioning of a mix of provision. So that will be able to better meet the range of support needs that are out there, and also reflects other established models of good practice in other parts of the country, such as Housing First. And as I said, will also help us to meet some of the gaps in provision that have been identified. So, for example, issues around trying to support people who have very complex needs. The commissioning approach is set out for members in paragraph 2.7. And paragraph 2.9 just identifies some of the key areas of feedback that we received, and just to say that the strategy does aim to address all of these themes, many of which are going to be considered through the redesign work that's already happening. And really, just to summarise, just to make you aware of what the next steps are. So we are, as I say, already started on the redesign work, and we are looking to extend our engagement with providers and partners around different parts of the county. So specifically starting to have more discussions with people in East Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire and Fenland. We are also looking to undertake some market engagement sessions in February next year, which will again help us to further inform our models and how we take forward the implementation of the strategy. We are also working with procurement colleagues quite closely so that we can have a look at what the procurement approach will look like, and also in more detail as to what the procurement timetable should be and what the appropriate timescales are. And alongside that, we're also doing some contract development work with our legal team as well. The intention will be for outline specifications to be drafted and shared with this committee in March next year, and prior to that they will actually be shared with the member reference group members as well. The member reference group's been very helpful so far in helping us to shape our ideas.
Thank you very much indeed, Lisa, for that introduction. I know it's been a huge amount of work gone into this over a very long period of time, and I think we're getting to a good place on it. Right, we will now hear from Mr. Chris Jenkin. He is chairman of It Takes a City, Cambridge. He's requested to speak on this item. Mr. Jenkin, you have up to 3 minutes to address the committee, and if you're still speaking at the end of 3 minutes, the Democratic Services Officer may butt in to ask you to try and draw your remarks to a close. And then committee members will have the opportunity to ask you questions of clarification. And the committee will then move on to debate the report and the agenda item. So, Mr. Jenkin, when you're ready, you're very welcome, and thank you for coming along.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, Chair and councillors. It Takes a City was established in the wake of the 2018 Cambridge Summit on Homelessness to bring together organisations and individuals from across the community to develop new ways and bring new resources to reduce rough sleeping due to homelessness. Our role is to envision, encourage, coordinate, resource and facilitate new services, not necessarily to run them. We've established projects with partners around support, employment, housing and information, and are currently leading on the provision of emergency support and accommodation for Cambridge rough sleepers as part of COVID-19 Everybody In. One of our summit outcomes was a view that support should be for the journey, not the house, linked to the person, not to the accommodation. And a mentoring project was established to provide one way for the voluntary sector to provide support during a housing journey. We therefore very warmly welcome the proposed Street to Home strategy for Cambridge City, seeking to bring together commissioned and non-commissioned support for the journey. I'd like to pay tribute to Lisa and her city and county colleagues for the way that stakeholders are now being engaged in the run-up to the formal commissioning process. The strategy is a bold one, potentially changing the Cambridge hostel system and the contracts previously awarded that have been in place for many years, organisations, premises, people, sponsors. I'd like to ask the county and to the committee if they would consider, one, adopting a learning alliance model where a group of partners under a lead partner are commissioned to work out over time how best to achieve high order outcomes related to reducing rough sleeping, sustaining accommodation, improving health, human flourishing and self-efficacy, and an end to the revolving door. Two, adjusting the procurement strategy so that it gives time for partners to get together and prepare bids. 3, setting out a target architecture for the systems change expected, with a bias over time towards support for the journey and independent accommodation rather than hostels. 4, setting out a broad timetable for the systems change expected, starting with the status quo on the 1st of January 22, so that changes happen through the lifetime of and within the contract framework, not at the start. And 5, in addition to the requirement to repurpose street-based voluntary work, to set expectations on the very considerable support that might be available from the private and third sectors on the, in the provision of accommodation, support, and all those many things necessary for human flourishing, such as employment, social capital, and life skills. Chair, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jenkins, for a very detailed comments and some, thought-provoking questions. And actually, I met with officers recently on this subject, and 1 or 2 of your points that you've made was the grilling that I gave them as well. It's quite a difficult ask, this. It's a huge change, as you say. It's a pretty radical, bold change, and there's a lot of sort of steeped culture and ways of working, and it is probably quite challenging. So I think it is interesting how we approach the procurement and how we make sure that we don't destabilise what's going on in the short term, because people still need, a warm roof over their head, with the move to what is a much more aspirational ideal, to try and help people really on a properly sustainable basis, so that they deal with all of their underlying issues and they get the right intensive support at the right time when they're able to tackle all of those problems that they may have that's stopping them from being able to remain in accommodation. So some really thought-provoking points in there. Members, do you have any questions that you'd like to put to Mr. Jenkins? And we should thank him massively for your involvement in helping us to get to where we've got to. I know you've been heavily involved in your organisation, so thank you for what you've done. We really appreciate it. Councillor Howell. You're still muted, Mark.
Chairman, as much as I would like to speak, I think Councillor Harrison beat me to it, and I think it's only...
Oh, I couldn't see a blue hand from Councillor Harrison at all, sorry.
It is there, Chair, actually. It has been there for some time, but I don't mind at all who goes in order. And if it's a question of, if Mark had a question for Mr. Jenkins, then do that.
Apologies, Councillor Harrison. I hadn't got my participants list properly on my screen. Go on, Councillor Howell, you go first then. Thank you.
We're all terribly polite to each other, aren't we? I was just wondering if I could know a little bit more about It Takes a City, a little bit more about that, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, we've had a big summit, which a number of folks came to. 150 people came to back in November 18. And that was folks from county, city, public health, police, agencies, NHS, etc., etc. We framed 10 conversations around things that we felt were ways in which the wider community could complement the great efforts being made by the local authorities in reducing rough sleeping, recognising, of course, the numbers were high and had been increasing. And there was a general view in the community that something else needs to be done. We found during the summer of preparation, the doors were very wide open for us. And we were able to gather support from Andy Burnham from Manchester and Archbishop Rowan Williams as sponsors for our event. The 10 conversations were very well received, and action groups were formed around those conversations. In fact, around 2 of them didn't succeed. Well, 8 succeeded. We had 8 action groups, and one of them was around support. The ones around housing, employment, information, data, women's group, a youth group, and a steering group we also set up. The steering group then transformed itself into a charitable structure, and we now have a charitable company. It Takes a City Cambridge, of which I'm the chair. And we coordinate a number of action groups which are steadily progressing into projects and things that we can run. By and large, everything happens through our partners, not through us. So, for example, the mentoring project is led by CHS Group. Our employment project is also led by them. We run Street Support Cambridge, which is now Street Support Cambridgeshire, which all districts have now contributed to and are working together to form a county-wide information site for homelessness and rough sleeping. And we've been taking part in discussions with Lisa and colleagues around the change and support architecture, trying to bring the thinking from across the community. We have a housing project which has now formed itself into a new community land trust with the support of the combined authority, and that is now starting to construct modular homes. And we're working with officials across the county in terms of securing land on which they can be placed, and they will effectively become accommodation which will be the target of the Street to Home project in due course. There are further options that can be provided for people coming off the street or coming out of hostels. So we're fairly broad spread in what we do. There's probably about 100 different people working with us in different ways. We have 4 paid members of staff or self-employed contractors working for us directly, and a number of other people supporting us from around the county, including from the county council, city council, agencies, etc., working through these various action groups. As I say, we've been very pleased with the way that the support discussion has gone, because it seems to fit what we were thinking in the first place. So that's what we're about. We're there to facilitate and encourage. We don't aim to be a service provider. I very much doubt if we'll bid, for example, against these tenders that come up. If there's one about, it says a tender to engage the local community in providing additional support for our sleepers, we'll probably say, we'll do that, but we'll put £0 beside it because we're doing it anyway. That's what we're there for. If another provider wants our help in kind of framing that particular part of their bid, we'll help them do that. But we are keen to be not commissioned. With all due respect to your good selves as a commissioning body, we're very keen not to be commissioned in order that we can work across the wider community on a very sort of neutral basis.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, really helpful explanation, and thank you so much for existing and doing what you're doing. Really, it's absolutely brilliant, and I think if we can get everybody signed up to this direction of travel, we've got a massive chance to make a huge difference. I really think we have. So Councillor Harrison, I'm going to bring, I think you want to talk on the actual paper, so I'll bring you in first when we get to the paper. I've just got one question, Mr. Jenkins, if I may. Your sort of points for consideration for us to consider. Item 2 says adjusting the procurement strategy so that it gives time for partners to get together and prepare bids. And I completely understand what you're saying and why you're asking that. I just wondered what you were really asking for in terms of, so our timing here is that we are proposing to bring this back in our March committee next year. But obviously the commissioning approach has the opportunity to do what it wants once we've settled on it. And it could be that even though we sign it off in March, an element of what it recognises is the need for time for partners to get together and prepare bids. So you're not asking for a delay in our process, you're asking for it to be recognised that partners need some time to...
The current timetable says that tenders issued in May, responses in June. And I think the feedback that we've all got, those, that's just too short. If you then got to put a partnership together, there's no time to get the partners to variously agree their components within that. So you either understand that a lot more before June, or June has to be a later date. And just to recognise that if we consider that January the 1st is the start of the transition, in other words, nothing's changed on that date, it begins to change from that date, it'll make it much easier, I think, to pull together a bid, because a lot of the work can be then done from the start of the contract and not before it. So
that is a discussion I've already had with officers about whether you delay the start of the contract and allow people to have time to get to a new contract, or whether you recognise within the contract that there's a period of phasing while you change your service. It's an interesting discussion, that one, and I don't think it's bottomed out yet. Okay, so understood. It's the amount of time between when we sign off the procurement strategy and then actually asking people to bid and get together. So I know that Lisa's clocked what you've said, and we'll give that due consideration. And just to say, we will come back to you with a formal response, a written response on your questions, and thank you so much for putting them. Councillor Jones, was yours on for Mr. Jenkins?
Yes, I wanted to support what Mr. Jenkins has said, and also what you've just said, because one of the issues I think about commissioning, especially if you're trying to commission in order to save money. I'm not saying no, that's the focus, but often, you know, people think of commissioning as creating greater efficiency, if I put it like that, is that there isn't enough time allowed for partnerships to develop. And what then can happen is that a big provider who doesn't have to organise partnerships can kind of come in more easily and bid. And if a number of providers need to get together, those providers don't necessarily have adequate time to do it. So I think he's absolutely right in saying if you want the best quality of providers and you want partnerships and community-based partnerships, then having enough time in that process, as you said, is really important. So it was really an endorsement of that.
Thank you very much, and we will definitely give that due consideration about how we support what you're saying. Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Jenkin. We really appreciate you putting this very thoughtful sort of challenge to us, but also, you know, support for what we're trying to do. It's really appreciated. We will now move on to discuss the actual paper and the item, and I've got Councillor Harrison first.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few points. And actually, before I make any points, I just wanted to say that it's quite evident to me that you've got a real grip on this, and I appreciate that. I just want you to know that. I can hear that you know you get it, and you know, and that's great.
Thank you.
So I mean, it's obvious that a lot of really good work has been done now, and you know, it's taken a long time in a way to get here, but it's right that it has, and you know, I fully support the strategy and you know, in all its goals and visions and objectives and principles and Lord knows what. One can go on dividing all of those things up, and I noticed from some of the, you know, responses that there's people, you know, who would rather see something that's a vision called a principle or a principle called a vision. It doesn't matter. I think the content is right. You know, the thrust is absolutely right, and I'm fully behind it. I'm also very, very pleased to hear that that the plan is not to take the remaining savings, and that, you know, that is obviously right in the circumstances, and it's much appreciated. It would be helpful to me to just understand. Actually, I was quite surprised when I then went on to read that such a large proportion of the planned savings, in fact, have been found, and I would just appreciate a few words from Lisa about how that has been done, and you know, so that I understand that a bit better. I've really only got one sort of detail point, if I may. It's on page 157. It's just in the list of, I think they're called the commissioning. It's called the commissioning approach. Hold on one just a second. Yes, it's just under the bullet points about under the heading innovative, and it's just that word innovative that just slightly bothers me, because innovation is a great thing and I'm all for it, but it can also be very lumpy. You know, it can sort of, there can be an implication that it's big bang stuff that is required in innovation. And one of the really important things that I think we you know, need to achieve here as time goes by is actually adaptability or flexibility. And I think that that could just be better expressed. I'm not, you know, going to suggest how, but it's just that it's not just that you know, it's not that the word innovative is wrong, but it can be limited, and it can infer a sort of, as I say, a sort of big bang approach where change only comes when it's something radical. And it is possible that we might over time actually want to go back to something that we used to do. And probably people would say, well, that's not innovation. So, you know, is there a danger then that we don't do it because it's not innovative? Flexibility and adaptability, learning on the job, is particularly important, I think, in this very, very complex world that this strategy covers. So that is just a suggestion that we try to get a little bit more of an inference about adaptability and flexibility into those principles. I just wanted to make just three other sort of just general observations, really. One is, and Mr. Jenkin mentioned it, and it's about, and you mentioned it, and it's about this issue of the continuity of support for individuals, if you like. I think Mr. Jenkins called it, was it linked to person rather than house or something? And you know, there's loads of different ways you could phrase it, but I do think that personalisation is incredibly, incredibly important, and in the end repays from a point of view of achievement, but and will actually repay in a financial sense as well. It's a really key thing. The other thing I just wanted to say was that in relation to Housing First, it's obviously really good that we are getting underway with this. It's really important that Housing First, that anyway elements of Housing First are embedded within the general housing provision, because this gives the opportunity for the person to remain put permanently, whilst the Housing First allocation, if you like, shifts to another unit of housing, unit of tenanted housing. And so for all the fact that we're creating specialist types of housing, which will provide for the shorter term, it's really important that, and I think this is a district council thing really, but I just mentioned it here because obviously Housing First is a key element of the partnership working now. I do think it's important that it's able to stretch itself across all sorts of different kinds of housing provision, including general tenanted housing provision. And the other thing, of course, is just to say that it's just obvious that obviously the more stable and long-term the funding streams are, the better. Again, because in recognition of the complexity of all of this, and I know that we all know how difficult that is.
Thank you ever so much, Councillor Harrison. Just before I bring officers in, can people who aren't muted please mute, because I seem to be getting some feedback or something weird. That's better. Thank you very much for all those points. I know you're a huge advocate of Housing First in particular, and this sort of direction of travel. I know you've done a huge amount of work in it around City of Cambridge, and so thank you for your supportive stance on the proposals that are here. The savings already made. I'll bring Lisa in a sec, but those. We have realised some significant savings, and they've been made in a number of different ways, because if you remember, this housing related support budget line in our budget was a huge mishmash of all sorts of different services that were sort of legacy services over a very long period of time, coming out of the supporting people budget from many moons ago. And many of the services that were in that budget line were still totally relevant and have been moved to either the mainstream children's budget lines or the mainstream adults budgets lines, and we're helping towards our prevention agenda. There were a number of remaining services where we felt that there needed to be changes, and I know that officers have worked with providers to reform some of those services, and that's where some of the savings came from. In terms of your point about innovation, I think your point about the desire, the need for flexibility is a really valid one. And I don't know if the word flexible, I don't think the word flexible actually appears. I think it is a really, and it's almost the same thing to me as personalised. It's the whole point of this is about being able to personalised services instead of just a one-size-fits-all and bouncing in and out of hostels, in a sort of quite processy driven way, formulaic way. And I think that's really important. If we can't do personalisation, and to do that you have to be flexible. That is exactly what we're looking to procure. So I can see Lisa nodding and agreeing. So I do think that does need to be in there, and it needs to be recognised in how we award tenders, I think, and how we work with providers. I think that's a really valid point. And for me, it's the thing that matters here is outcomes. It's absolutely about outcomes, and we will know if we've been successful by whether or not we've helped people who have had long-standing issues about that in their lives that mean that they can't sustain accommodation. And if we get them to a point where they can deal with some of that, to a point where they're happy and stable in their accommodation, we know we will have won. And the great thing about this is that there is a huge drive nationally now from the government. I think, it was there before COVID, but it's absolutely been given a spotlight by COVID. And we've got this one chance to grab it and make a difference forever and sort this problem out so that we don't keep coming back to it, and that people are properly and intensively supported at the beginning to help them deal with all those underlying issues to get their lives back on track. And that's what's needed. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. So yeah, I agree. Flexibility is definitely required. And in terms of Housing First being embedded, I'm looking at Lisa, and it absolutely is embedded in this model, but it's not necessarily the right thing for absolutely everybody in terms of where they are in their journey. And so we still need these alternative provisions short term to support people kind of immediately. But absolutely recognising what you're saying, and it's certainly the approach that we've tried to take at the District Council in East Cambs. You know, and essentially it's very simple: give people a stable home that that they know is theirs and make them feel safe, and then try and put in the support to help with all of the other issues. So totally.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Councillor Harrison.
Can I just respond by saying that in mentioning Housing First, I absolutely don't mean to imply that hostile forms of accommodation and aren't important.
No.
It's so important that we have that next thing.
Yes, say that. That's,
really agree with you that it's important.
You just want to make sure that it's totally embedded in here, and it is. Lisa, did you want to add anything to what's the discussion, and particularly around the savings that have already been made?
Okay. So in terms of the savings, Councillor Harrison, the majority of those have come through retendering in other areas, because obviously the HRS budget does cover a number of other client groups as well than those we're discussing today. It's come from savings that providers have offered. It's also come from some contracts that have ended, and then finance colleagues have also secured some of the saving through things like underspend on uplifts, that sort of thing. So those are the key areas that it's come from.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Okay, Councillor Harrison, is that your hand from before? Or yeah. Okay, so committee, I haven't heard anyone speaking against this, and I know from past discussions on this subject that we are all united in our support for this, the way this is going, and it's been a great piece of cross-council working with Cambridge City, well embedded in how we're doing things and what we're doing, and being a driver in many ways for that. So thank you to them. And what we absolutely need to make sure now is that this way of working and thinking is happening across the whole county, and that is firmly in these proposals as well. And some areas obviously have more of a need around that than others. So just a reminder, we're being asked to adopt the new strategy, and we're also being asked to note that the draft budget tables include a removal of the remaining, relatively modest remaining HRS saving. So if anybody does have a problem with that, or either wants to abstain or vote against, if you can indicate now with your blue hand. I don't think there is anybody, so there does seem to be unanimous support for that. So thank you very much, Lisa, and to all officers for the huge amount of work. I mean, it has been a long process and not easy, because there's a huge amount of legacy stuff in this budget line, but I really think we've got a fantastic opportunity now to make a proper difference for people across Cambridgeshire with this, and I think it's very exciting actually. I know we have lots of supporters around the place, so it's really good. Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to item 8, which is discharge to assess, and Charlotte, I think you're taking us through this report.
Yep, very happy to. Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I think this is a report that the committee actually asked for, to give an update on the work that we're doing on discharge to assess. So it's a very comprehensive report, and obviously this is very much a live issue at the moment. As we sort of reach the winter pressures period in earnest, and our hospitals are under a lot of pressure at the moment, so it's very timely. So I won't go through the paper in detail, just draw your attention to the key issues that I think are worth you noting. So this is a national drive. We were already working on discharge to assess across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, because it is a good thing for patients. It is better for patients to be assessed in the community than on a ward, quite simply because often it's much harder to get a real assessment of what someone's potential is when they're in a hospital ward and hospital bed than when they've actually come home. So this is a positive move, and there's a strong evidence base to support it.
I'm so sorry to intervene. I'm so sorry. Charlotte, could you bring the microphone down to your mouth, please?
Apologies.
Thank you very much.
Did you hear me? Did you hear me so far?
We could hear you, but it was a
Hear
bit
me?
faint. But thank
We
you very
did.
much.
Sorry, Mark. I didn't see you indicating. Apologies.
Thanks, Mark.
Charlotte, we did hear you.
Yeah. So yes, I mean it's a good development for patients, but obviously it's contingent upon all the organisations concerned doing what's needed to make sure that someone is actually, once they've been moved into a community setting for an assessment, moving quite quickly. So it's very much a multi-agency effort, and the paper sets that out in detail, and it talks about the role of the single point of access, the different pathways that exist. The fact that actually part of what we've done in the local authorities, we've moved our social workers out of the hospital, doing their assessments in the hospital, to moving them into the community. I'll come back to that in a moment, because actually at the moment we are actually also having conversations about whether we've got that quite right and whether we need to have a bit more of a presence in the hospital. We've moved towards 7-day working, so that includes brokerage, but also the operational teams, especially the discharge planning team and the raiment team. We've secured some additional funding through national government to increase capacity, which the paper talks about. Obviously, this is very important, and it's important to stress that we, and the paper talks about the work that we're doing with the voluntary sector, because clearly if someone is going to be discharged into the community, it's really important that there is a sort of what we call wraparound support for them, and that we build that onto community networks that already exist and the support mechanisms that already exist. The paper also talks about section 2.6 talks about the additional funding that we have had as a system to support discharge, to assess and to increase capacity in some areas, and that's until April. We've also, as part of that, been able to agree with the CCG a number of additional beds, which I'm sure Will would be happy to talk about, so that if actually what's needed is bed-based care, then that's available in the community. And we have also secured some additional funding for CHC assessments, because obviously as a result of COVID, the CHC assessment process was deferred, and so there's a backlog which we need to be part of solving that problem. Some of the more complex challenges that we've had have included identifying designated settings for people who are COVID positive. That's something I know that has always been a great concern for members, and so we are we've got a decision about that now and are moving that forward. And you've just heard about the work that's been done under the heading of the Infection Control Fund. I know one of the things that members have said to me is that they miss their Gantt charts that they used to get showing how we were doing in terms of detox or delayed transfers of care. Actually, that has been suspended currently as a measure. I don't think we're necessarily expecting it to be increased, to come back, but a number of key performance indicators have been agreed, and we are working to kind of monitor our performance. But this is very much something that we're doing as a whole system. It's not something the council can do on its own, and we're playing a very significant part in all of that. The paper also talks about the work that we've done to develop the winter plan, and our winter plan has been sort of quality assured by ADAS regionally, and we've had good feedback about it. And then the other thing that we are currently working on, which you may be interested in discussing, is the mass vaccination programme. This is a very, in a way, the paper, each week we could be adding something new into it, because there are lots of national developments and lots of local developments. But this week's additional thing that we're trying to achieve is obviously making sure that the care home staff, who are priority for the Pfizer vaccination in the hospital, from the hospital hubs, are accessing those vaccinations. So the paper paints, I think, a very good picture of the range of activities that are going on at the moment and the various actions that we're taking. But I'm sure between us, Will and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Charlotte and Will. Yes, I think we did ask for this to be brought forward, because I think this is a subject that pops up in members' email inboxes, not all the time, but on a relatively, I'm pretty sure all members here will have had at least one or two, queries from members of the public with loved ones stuck in hospital beds, etc., seemingly inappropriately. So it is a subject that keeps keeps coming round, and really important during this pandemic, obviously. So thanks for bringing the paper, because hopefully it gives people a flavour of what's currently going on. And there have been an enormous amount of changes and an enormous effort to make things better during the COVID pandemic by necessity. And frankly, you know, there aren't many good things coming out of COVID, but it is one of the good things, because the county council had really tried hard in the past to get this stuff working. We had our staff working 7 days a week in hospital settings, trying to do proper and timely discharges, but the rest of the system just wasn't there to support it. And it feels like now we're getting into a different place where everybody's suddenly woken up. And I think the other feeling that I get is that, you know, the whole thing is much more flexible, and you're just trying things, seeing what works. If it doesn't work, you know, stop that, try something else, make it work. And that feels really good. So it's quite dynamic, and just trying to be pragmatic and get things done, and things are happening at pace, which is really good. And if people are being dealt with in a timely fashion and going into appropriate settings with the right care, that's what matters, obviously. Because people tend to get stuck, don't they, in whatever provision they end up in coming out of hospital, tends to stick around for a while. So I think that's what's important. So thank you very much for the information. I've got Councillor Jones with questions or comment.
Thank you, and it's a very interesting paper, and it's good to see this from the other side, because I'm on the Health Committee, and the Health Committee is obviously looking at some of these issues. And there has been, you're quite right, Councillor Bailey, there has been some more sort of cheering news, I think, from, or it is seen as more cheering news from the perspective of the hospitals. And I think they have got more, the trusts have got more incentive now to cooperate. I think there's one legacy question, if I may, which I ought to ask on behalf of my residents, because it's something they were really, really concerned about early on. And that is about the COVID testing of people who are moving out, the discharge to assess. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about the 2-hour shift, which is what happened very early in the first pandemic wave. But I'm thinking about now, and I think a reassurance that COVID testing is happening, and that people who are being moved out quickly to be assessed fine are actually moving out safely, as it were. That's really important. And I noticed there's a provision here for people who need to be isolated, but that kind of doesn't come out particularly much in the paper. So that was the first question I had. The second question I had was really about how this is going to be sustained, because I think everybody is very comfortable and keen in the middle of the pandemic still to do this work together. Certainly the trusts are aware. I've talked to Adam Brooks, and their numbers are, you know, the discharge, the delayed transfer of care is obviously decreasing, and that's a real, really cheering. But what happens from April onwards when the extra finance runs out? Is this sustainable? And I think that's a really important issue, because that requires the sustainability and transformation work, the STP work, to kind of be continued. It requires a continued commitment. And one of the concerns about that, of course, is always, as you come back to the money, the funding streams. Now, I know that in some cases, and there's certainly one trust that has actually redeployed some staff to help with some of this discharge to assess work. I'm not thinking about CPFT here, I'm thinking about another trust actually. And I know that's happened. But on a longer term basis, if you're paying the costs of staff and they're being redeployed to work somewhere else, then that is a cost to you as a trust. So how is this going to be sustained going forward? Because obviously, from the point of view of the people being discharged themselves and their relatives and friends and family, this is a really important and positive step.
Excellent, thank you. Really good questions. So Charlotte, testing in care homes, have we got assurance that it's all happening properly, and the sustainability and the STP changes?
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably ask Will to come in as well on the second question. So in terms of testing, yes, I mean, I think it's you know, we've been very, very keen to make sure that no one leaves hospital and returns to a care home without their COVID status being known. So the expectation is that someone will have had a test within 48 hours. And we're very clear about that. We have also been very clear, and to be fair, actually our system partners have been very supportive of this, that we don't, if someone can't be safely transferred to their care home and isolated and kept in a situation where they can actually avoid spreading COVID, then they complete their isolation period in the hospital. That was obviously until we've sorted out the solution around the what are called the designated beds, which is a terrible technical term, but it's basically, as you say, Councillor Jones, it's a facility where if someone is COVID positive, can't safely return to their normal home, which in some cases might be a care home, it's somewhere that they can go for a very time limited period. So I think, you know, we've learnt a lot nationally and as a system, and I think as I say, generally what we've found is that our hospital partners have been very supportive of that as a position, despite being under considerable pressure actually at the moment. But we are glad that we've now got the designated beds sorted out. I think the funding question is a good one. Will, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'll have a go. I mean, you're right, Councillor Jones. It is going to be very challenging. I think. Particularly so because we talk about the latent demand that's been building up in the community, and that's going to hit all of our services across the whole system, not just social care, but certainly health as well. So I would say that it is a collective challenge, and it's a collective challenge because the funding may stop, and also the demand is set to increase as a result of that latent demand. What I would say, though, is that during the pandemic, we have seen, and we talked about it earlier, some real changes in behaviours and approaches across the whole system. And there are some really good examples. For example, you know, the way that we've worked together to joint commission and played to each other's strengths in doing that, and the way that we, as a result, have brought capacity online and done that in a joint way. We've seen the benefits of our pooling our resources together and working together. So, for example, you know, with the establishment of the multidisciplinary teams in the community that are supporting care homes and what have you. And out of that, oddly, there are efficiencies to be had. You know, so on one hand, yes, you know, it's going to be very challenging and there's going to be significant extra demand coming into the system. But on the other hand, you know, we've learned a lot through COVID, and that learning has been about how we work together, how we pool our resources more effectively. And I think also we talked earlier about the business plan and think communities. So that for us is the other sort of key learning, which is about, you know, identifying, working with the communities, which is what we've really, I think, exemplified as part in the COVID period, and sort of identifying that demand and working much earlier to prevent that escalating. And I think with the ICF, the integrated care model, so we're working with health around the new integrated care model. I think, you know, with some of these things coming together because they complement each other, I think communities and an integrated care model, I'm hopeful that we can sustain certainly the joint working, even if that means, you know, working through some very financially challenged times across the system.
Thank you very much, Will.
Thank you.
James, did you want to?
Briefly on that.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. And I agree that the integrated care model, if we manage to begin to develop it, sorry if I could be sort of more a formal sense as opposed to a goodwill sense, that could help significantly. I mean, one of the issues you raise in the paper is about, I think it's paragraph 2.6 or 2.26, I'm not quite sure, I can't read my writing, is about the sort of 7 days a week, 8 to 8 social care service that you're staffing that you're providing. One of the issues I know that has affected, and I've had residents come back on this, has been that that's in place, but what's not in place is, for example, the primary care support. So they haven't got GPs, and in some cases people are being discharged without medication from the hospital. They then try and get it from the GP and it's not available. So we've got, that's just one example, but I think there's quite a long way to go before that discharge 7-day 8 to 8 service is actually anything like a seamless service. Because I know from comments back from residents that at the moment people have been falling between the cracks to some extent.
So certainly, as far as the discharge process, there are issues as part of that process that there are areas that we need to improve on, because and you're quite right, if something isn't done in the early part of the process, it complicates the experience for individuals at the end of the discharge process. And again, I would say as a system, we are aware of what those things are, and we are, collectively working to find solutions, and that's what I mean about the system as behaviours have matured during the COVID period, in the sense of we are all collectively working together to find solutions for the problems that we're experiencing, including in the discharge process. I don't think anyone is claiming that it's perfect, but I think we've got a really good handle on where we need to focus and what the priorities are, including meds.
And just from the point of view, so I am the County Council representative on the STP board as a result of being chair of the Adults Committee. So if there is ever anything that anybody wants me to put forward, relating to the items on the agenda, but I also have informal ways of putting things forward, I'm very happy to do that. And I think, Linda, what you said about goodwill transferring to an ICS versus a more formal thing, I think the STP board itself would fully recognise what you're saying and admit to the fact that the STP is very good at coming up with saying the right things on bits of paper, but actually implementing and doing and making change, it has not been good at. And we talk about it all the time at the STP board, and we recognise it, and it is well recognised. But finally, just for a bit of feedback, it does feel to me like sitting on that board that things are now really shifting. They are having to, frankly, and there is more will to make it happen. The wheels fall off often when you start getting into the nitty-gritty of finances and stuff, but there is a collective will for sure to try and make change, and people are becoming very impatient with change not happening. So hopefully things will start to happen. But if there's anything ever specific you want me to put forward, like formally at the board, I'm very happy to take anything. Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very supportive of people spending as little time in hospital as they can, particularly in these difficult times. However, I am a bit concerned. Under 2.9.4, it mentions modelling of the optimum number of daily discharges being 174 a day, of which 44 of those are people with complex discharges. Do we keep any data, or will we be keeping any data on people who have to be readmitted because they were discharged too early? And also, what conversations is going on with those particular patients and their families to ensure that they are comfortable with their discharge and the support they're going to receive during that time?
Question.
Yes, so the hospitals actually do collect data about discharges where especially they collect data about readmissions, or is probably the best way of putting it. We also have a regular meeting, a discharge success steering group, where we will take specific cases where we feel uncomfortable or concerned about the decisions that were made, and see what we can learn from that. Because obviously, you know, part of what we're doing here as a system is being prepared to accept a level of risk to enable someone to get home and make a decision about what their longer term pathway is if they need anything. So inevitably, that doesn't always go well, and sometimes people do get readmitted. So I think we've got a good system in place for doing that. The other thing is that when people are admitted to hospital, they do receive information, and their family receives information explaining discharge to assess. We've been doing this really since it started. So there's quite a clear information given about discharge to assess, and also explaining to people the arrangements around funding if someone ends up in a bed that's funded through discharge to assess funding. I think there's always room for improvement though, and the Health Watch survey was really helpful, I think, in pointing us to some examples of where, I mean, a common theme in the Health Watch survey was around communication. Often our complaints to adult social care are about the basics of communication, remembering to talk to everyone concerned so that everyone feels like they know what's going on. And obviously that's doubly difficult at the moment because of the limits about who the hospital can actually bring into the hospital in the way they would normally communicate with family and relatives. So I wouldn't say that it's perfect at all. I think what I would say is that that's probably an area where there's most room for improvement. But part of the, I mentioned earlier, there's a possibility that we've made a decision this week actually to have a greater social work presence in the hospitals, because what social workers are really good at is that process of you know, talking to everyone concerned, talking to the family, making sure everyone knows what the plan is. And so we have decided this week to actually put some of our staff back into the hospitals, and we're going to evaluate that at the end of the week and what difference that's made. So there's definitely room for improvement, but it's something that we're very aware of, that process of talking through with the family is really, really important still, and explaining how the process works and how the funding works.
Well, can I just come back on that and say I'm really pleased to hear that this has been thought through and that social workers are going back into the hospital, because the last thing I think any of us would want to see is somebody being discharged who is totally uncomfortable with that, unless there's a very good reason why they shouldn't be in hospital. You know, we need to make sure that people are comfortable with their discharges.
And often, I mean, just to add to this, because I think often the reason people used to and do get delayed in hospital still is because there's a sort of worry about, particularly from the family's perspective, about if a proposal has been put forward around moving to a residential home, for example, there's a worry about, well, is that the right outcome for my family member? And often that can develop quite a prolonged discussion and debate with the family. So in a way, I think it's better for the patient to be moved out of the hospital and then for those discussions to take place in the community rather than take place on a hospital ward, when actually it's really hard to work out what someone's capability is. And some people, there's a real risk that people might get recommended for a residential home when actually with a bit more support at home with enablement and intermediate care, actually they could become independent again. But it's not a straightforward, you know, it's not a sort of easy solution. It requires a lot of professional judgment, and I think as a system, as Will said, we're learning all the time about how we need to improve it. So I don't think we're complacent at all about the risks involved.
I appreciate it, but as somebody who had a family member in hospital earlier this year who was discharged and had to be admitted in the middle of the night, right, 5 minutes later as an emergency, I think, and they weren't comfortable with being discharged in the first place. So I do think it is very, very important to listen to patients and find out why they're uncomfortable before they're just shoved out the door.
And I do think medications are an issue as well. Just it's such a basic practical thing that you'd think would be relatively straightforward to get right, but it does seem to cause huge issues either at one end or another. Councillor Howell.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. With regards to paragraph 2.8.1, which is on page 178, there is a sentence in the middle there that says the primary purpose of this fund is to support adult social care providers, including those whom the local authority does not have a contract, to reduce the rate of COVID-19 transmission and in between care homes and support wider workforce resilience. Can I have confirmation, please, that we will never, as part of this fund or any other funding that we give, insist that everyone has to have the vaccine, whether it be staff or patients, and people will always have the freedom to say no.
Yeah, people will always have the freedom to say no. So adult social care has got a very, very clear legal framework within which it operates, which is around people's ability and capacity to make their own decisions. And if they can't make their own decisions, working out who can make a decision in their best interest. So we have a dedicated team which works on that, and we are very, very clear that actually that is paramount in these situations. So no, that there won't be any that wouldn't be possible to enforce something.
Thank you very much, Reid. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's good discussion. I think it's really good to have this paper and share it with fellow members if, they're asking about the process, because this is kind of, the current state of play and what's meant to be happening. And if it's not, it's always useful to understand why not. So thank you very much for that. Committee's just asked to note and comment on the content, so we've done that. So we'll move on to our last main item today, item 9, which is EU exit preparations, and Dustin McWhirter, I think you're here just to introduce the report. Thank you for lasting. I don't know if you've been with us all the time, but sorry it's taken so long. Dustin, are you able to join? There you are. Brilliant. Hello.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Dustin McWhirter. I'm a Senior Transformation Advisor in the Transformation Team, and I'm supporting the Cross-Directorate Officer Task Force that meets regularly to consider EU exit risks and actions. There's just a few things I want to note here to introduce the report. The task force has recently stepped up to more frequent meetings in anticipation of a period of intense activity in response to EU exit negotiations and guidelines. I should note that this committee report was written, of course, prior to this week's ongoing negotiations with the EU, and our group will meet to discuss any implications that come out of those negotiations in the coming days and brief members accordingly. I'd also like to note that Stuart Thomas, our head of emergency planning, provides our link into the Local Resilience Forum's EU exit group, where we join up with partners and district councils to ensure we're covering actions between us and are as prepared as possible. The Local Resilience Forum has recently reviewed reasonable worst case scenario guidance from central government and have considered issues such as impact on fuel, food and medicine, possible impacts on our transport networks, and the potential for civil unrest. Where applicable to the Council's remit, these issues are reflected in our risk register, which is Appendix 1 to the report. And of course, it's worth reiterating that as a Council, we already have robust emergency plans in place for things like fuel shortages and transport disruption, irrespective of the cause. More broadly, the officer group has been focusing especially on certain key areas. One of those is the EU settlement scheme, as it applies to our own workforce, the workforce of our providers, and our residents. Of course, we're especially conscious of how this pertains to adult social care staff and providers, alongside longer-term recruitment concerns. And so a priority for the adult social care representatives in our group is our continued work with providers to develop workforce resilience plans and mutual aid arrangements. Another issue is communications.
Oh dear, he was just in his prime, and we seem to have lost Dustin. I think he was just going to talk about communications. I don't know if anybody else was going to pick up, Dustin, hello, welcome back. Just as we were talking about communications, you stopped communicating.
Of course, yeah, well timed, wasn't it? Yeah, apologies. I may have an unstable connection, so hopefully it'll hold up. So yeah, just to finish up very briefly on communications, we're making sure that we get messages out to the public quickly and clearly. We have a communication strategy that helps ensure key messages are highlighted and actions are simplified for all key players. And that includes messages across the region as well as local advice. And finally, we're monitoring a range of issues issues that concern the organization, such as compliance issues related to data protection, the policy impact of any new legislation as it emerges, and any potential risk to our supply chain. So we review our risk register on a regular basis, and I'm happy to take away any questions that you may have for individual risk owners on there, or take any more general questions you have.
Thank you very much, Dustin. And if your internet keeps being wobbly, do feel free to switch off your camera if you need to. Right, members of the committee, do you have any questions for Dustin? You've got the report there and the risk register. I think this is something we did ask to have on the agenda. Councillor Mark Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I'm going to go on to the risk register, and I want to discuss BX6 and BX9, which are both on page 191, I think. Could somebody please give me a further explanation on both those, just to flesh it out a bit for me, please? BX6, recruitment, and BX9, finance and funding. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So BX6, so BX5 and BX6 are somewhat close together, but BX6 has to do with the longer term impact of recruitment for our own workforce. So that has to do with risk that might emerge from the new immigration scheme and the way that might impact our recruitment for our own workforce. BX9 has to do basically with kind of general inflation at a national level. So just the costs of everything rising and the way that will impact any services we procure or goods or materials we might have to purchase.
Chairman, if you don't mind, just a small little add-on to that, if you don't mind. So with regards to both of those, BS6 and BX9, do you have an actual how much it would cost, or are you just highlighting there may be a problem? Have you worked out the actual figures yet at all?
Yeah, no, I think it's more the former concern, but I'm happy to take that back to those individual risk owners just to ensure that's the case.
Chairman, I'm not asking for speculation. I'm quite happy to wait until we've got a bit more concrete evidence. There's no need for that, but thank you very much indeed. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on those risks being the three which are red, even with the mitigation that you can do. So firstly, this is almost with a deal or without a deal. It's your best assessment of the situation that might occur from next calendar year. And secondly, could we ensure that we include it, as Mark, I think, was implying, in the agenda plan for January or March, so that once we know whether we've got a deal or not, we can more accurately assess what the implications are likely to be for the county council and its suppliers.
Sounds entirely sensible.
Chairman, yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, no, I was just going to say, I would like that. That would be great. Can I also just say, please, Chairman, just while you're, I want to also say how well we've done as well with regards to BX1, 2 and 3, from red and right down to quite low figures, 6 and 12 in the after mitigation column. And, the team have worked very, very hard here. And I don't want to just concentrate on the ones which are still red. I think they've done exceptionally well, and that should be noted as well. But yeah, what Councillor Wilson just said as well, please. Thank you.
Obviously, many factors are outside of our local control, clearly. But yes, I think that sounds very sensible. We will look into Tamar just to make sure that we've got it somewhere on our forward agenda plan to bring it back. We'll bring back the whole risk register, I guess, but with a bit of a focus on the ones that we are concerned about, we've cited today. At an appropriate time, we'll work out when that needs to be. Thank you. Okay, I've got no one else indicating to speak on that, so we're just asked to note and comment on that.
Because that
absolutely, thank you. Yes, quite. It's good to know people are concentrating on these and on top of them as much as we possibly can be. Right, item 10 is the Adults Committee agenda plan. Members, you've been sent a new agenda plan today by email, just with some updates. Tamar, I don't think there's been anything since, has there?
No, so the two updates are on the March Committee Integrated Care Partnership update, and then the May Committee, we've moved Adults Positive Challenge Report to the May Committee.
Very much. So yeah, members, the intention at the March Committee with the Integrated Care Partnership that we were talking about earlier is that Mike Moore, who's the chair of the STP board, will come to talk to us about it and no doubt answer a lot of questions, I rather suspect. So yeah, that's the plan. So make sure we know about that one. Any, Councillor Wilson, you've got your hand up.
Yes, please. I'd like to suggest that we should discuss the progress with the money, the resources at the next meeting. At the beginning of the discussion on the business planning, we heard about the position that we're likely to be in because of overspends on the Adults Committee. And the report that came round, which is in correspondence for noting, indicates that the forecast variance outturn previously was 8.9 million, and it's gone up within a month to 9.7 million. I personally think that we should actually consider this sort of change at a committee in the same way as we have recently in the last two items where we have noted and commented on something. I accept it's not necessarily something for us to decide on, but at the very least we should be doing is in a public setting, understanding what the situation is in spending the money by this committee.
Councillor Wilson, two things I'd say about it. One is, you know, that detail is included in the business planning proposals, and so, you know, we have had an opportunity to, you know, by necessity it's included because, you know, it has a knock-on effect to the next financial year because it's an ongoing pressure, an ongoing situation when it's revenue items. So, you know, it is in there. But really, the main thing I want to say is that we have a really, really long March committee already. With a number of very meaty items, one or two of which we've already moved today at our pre-briefing meeting, our agenda setting meeting earlier with officers. And, you know, I've already asked Tamar to schedule March's meeting for a longer meeting. So, you know, I think we've had a good go at the business plan today, which obviously includes information about the current financial situation. So I'm really, you know, it will get fair hearing, no doubt, at February full council. And, you know, I think that will be an opportunity to, you know, say what you want to say about it. But I don't think we're going to really add anything necessarily by bringing it back again in March when we've already got such a full agenda. So,
well, with respect, at full council at the moment, we're being encouraged to reduce the number of contributions that we make. We can't go into the sort of detail that we would hope to go into in an adults committee. I accept that March agenda is quite long, but to my mind, this is a vitally important part of the committee's work to understand what the overspend is likely to be by the end of the year, and that we could either do it in January or we could use the reserve date in February, or we could have an extra item in March and move some of the March items to a later date. I doubt that many of them are time critical as this would be.
Well, we've looked carefully at the March items, and actually some of them have, you know, because of COVID and trying to keep the agendas short in the real intensive period of COVID, a lot of these items have been hanging over for a long time. We've looked very carefully at them all this morning. We've already moved one, the Adults Positive Challenge report. You know, honestly, Councillor Wilson, I think we've had a good opportunity today to consider the finances and the budget of the Adults Committee. And I think you've got every opportunity. I know what you're saying about full council, but it is only guidance and you are free to say what you need to say at full council. So I really don't want to start squeezing something further into the March committee. I think, you know, it is chock-a-block. It's going to be a long meeting, and I've already asked Tamar to extend, you know, the length of that meeting. So, but, you know, we will make sure that as ever, that the, you know, finance and performance reports are sent round committee. So you will have the information, And, you know, we have had a good go at it today with the business plan, which is an integral part of that. So,
well, we've had a good. It's final.
Well, Councillor Wilson,
comment.
I think I've given you my answer, and
we've had a good go on the situation as it is today. With the situation has got worse by £1 million in 1 month. We have no idea what the situation is likely to be in another few months' time, whether we're going to continue to overspend, whether the government is going to help to bail us out. I would have thought it was something which the committee ought to be aware of and discussing, but I'll leave it with you.
I will make sure that committee is aware of what's taking place so that they receive the financial and performance report, which they always do if and when it doesn't come to committee. So in all those intervening provisional dates, we are always sent the finance and performance report, and we will continue to make sure that all members of the committee receive that information so that you will be aware, and you will have your opportunity to say whatever it is you want to say about the finances of the Adults Committee at full council anyway in February. You know, we'll keep this under review, but you know, this is going to be a long meeting in March, so but we'll keep it under review. Okay, anything else from anybody on the forward agenda plan? Okay, well, thank you very much, all members, particularly the substitutes, and to Councillor Jones for joining at late notice and stepping in for the Labour Party. Much appreciated, and have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thanks very much.